We are going on a quest and rooting for the underdog in today's Hear Me, See Me podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Bruner. Glad to have you along. Hear Me, See Me is a mental health awareness initiative based here at WIBW TV in Topeka, Kansas. And we have a very special guest with us today, the actor.
Oh my.
Sean Astin is with us. You were in town, just visiting, hanging out, and decided to knock on the door.
I just was Girl Scout cookies and just thought maybe you guys would want to.
Did you have thin mints?
Yeah, of course.
Is there any other kind?
I don't know. There's samosas and I don't know. But no, I was here. AE was doing a similar kind of initiative, promoting mental health and creating an opportunity for their employees to hear a message about that. My mother, Patty Duke, the world famous, the legendary Patty Duke. My mama was had.
Your mama, that was
my mama.
Cute.
My mama. We're not in the South. We're in the Midwest. Isn't that how we talk in the Midwest?
Well, you know, Kansas is one of those places where it's kind of Midwest, it's kind of everything.
I was thinking it's the heart.
We are Kansas.
I was like the heart. Kansas is the heart of it, and then I'm like.
You can find the geographic center of the
It's kind of like the belly button, really.
Yeah.
It's kind of the belly button of America.
Like the Pillsbury Doughboy.
No, but anyway, my mom was had a bipolar mood condition, and so life in our family was, often very challenging. And in the second half of her life, she became a very strong activist, advocate for destigmatizing mental illness and promoting mental health and mental health awareness and stuff. And so when Lord of the Rings came out, I kind of was asked to sort of extend her legacy in this way, like talk about what it's like to grow up in a family with that. And we're a talky family. And
so why not?
Yeah, why not? Well, and we're comfortable sort of oversharing, and somehow that has been meaningful for us. I mean, my mom passed away, but you helped today.
Yes, we had a conversation where there were some high school students that were invited, and so we kind of had a little warm up, if you will, by a conversation. And it's fascinating because a lot of guests that I've had conversations with sharing personal stories here in this venue have been parents speaking about children and how it is like to be a parent who either has lost a child or has tried to help a child through a mental illness. It's not often that we have the child talking about the parent.
Yeah.
And you were very young when this was unfolding. I think, you hear bipolar and you're like, okay, so what does that mean? In your world, what did living with a mother who was living with bipolar disorder mean?
Yeah, it's funny the way you say that. Like when teenagers are going through like hormonal changes and things, like those dynamics combined with some mental, health challenges can kind of really mushroom. But yeah, no, my mom was an oversized personality to start with, and then the brain chemistry worked against her for a long time until she was able to seek a diagnosis and get it, and then seek a wellness plan, a treatment plan, and medication, and all the things that she did. And she became a very, it was slow going. Like she became a very public advocate before she really had control of herself, and she became an expert before she really knew anything. So as her son, watching the kind of hypocrisy of the early stages of her advocacy was a struggle for me, but then watching her grow into herself as a communicator, as someone who had like knowledge about what was going on, and then just seeing her relate to people and see the way they responded to her, and pain and trauma are I guess a part of everyone's life to some greater or lesser intensity, but for her to understand that her pain was actually had the ability to help other people, so then it felt like it wasn't pointless. There was like, she can create value out of the pain she experienced, and the same thing is true for me. Like being able to, get invited to talk at companies and with students, and so many different settings that I've been invited to speak in, and every one of them is sort of familiar and the same, and yet every one of them has its own unique quality. That's the conversation today with those students was so powerful. I mean, you saw it, right? It was so powerful. They were so invested, listening, caring. A lot of times we think of high school age or early college age people as like, they can't concentrate. They're on their phones. They're doing so. These young people were just as curious and emotionally available to like be impacted with what was being talked about. So I just was like, it's inspiring for me. It makes me, I'll go home and I'll go to the hotel tonight and, you know, call my wife and kids and FaceTime them and just be like, you know, just try and capture for them what I experienced, because, you know, and this morning was the same. It was really powerful to be with these professionals, that smart, you know, this insurance kind of empire that they have. They're, I guess a lot of them are kind of type A, but they're so sophisticated and fun that you could just see like the good humor that was there. But when we locked into like the seriousness of the subject matter, they were just so like generous. And I think it helps me like figure out, like, I really want to say something that's going to be meaningful to them. So I think, you know, it felt pretty good.
That whole experience is kind of indicative of the evolution of mental health conversations it would see. When you were a kid and you're at home, and once the diagnosis came and you heard a phrase bipolar, your mom heard the phrase bipolar, probably still a lot of whispers surrounded that. But now everybody can feel a little bit more free.
Yeah.
What is the change that you have seen?
Oh, anxiety, depression, whatever, bipolar, like everybody's, you know, there were still whispers. It was very scary. The idea of like, is it going to compromise your career to speak publicly? Well, she had already damaged her career with her inability to like control the mood swings, and the diagnosis that she received was salvation to her. She's like, so there's a name for what I'm experiencing, and there's like medicine that you can take, and you know, as you try and get better. So there was no turning back for her. She wanted to speak publicly, and you know, she was an undaunted person. She was a fearless individual. So if anybody would have fed back at her judgment, they would do that at their own peril. You know, she was, and in that way, she charted a really interesting path with that particular, you know, challenge, the bipolar challenge. She was one of the earliest of the kind of celebrity set to be on the news talking about it, and you know, and I've seen so many experiences with people who read her book or saw the movie she did or met her or listened to a speech she gave, and it's an amazing achievement, a life achievement for her, you know, above the Emmys and the Oscar and being the president of the union and like all these things that she did. People come up to me all the time, your mother saved my life. You know, like, your mother saved my father's life. He had a big crush on her, and is suffering really bad depression, and I gave him your mom's book, and he read it, and he was like, he wants to live. Like, those stories just come out all the time. So there's no overstating the power of community when people are, you know, when it's appropriate for them to share. Not everybody has to live the way she lived, but, you know.
That's nice to hear. But go back when you were a child.
Yeah.
What was it like growing up in your household? This
Well,
was more than mood swings.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, it was traumatic. It was violent. There was emotional violence, physical, like real physical abuse, beatings, and, you know, bruises, and like horrible things. She would crash a car on purpose. She'd like almost jump out of a moving car. She was in suicide, you know, attempt. It was like, you know, it was just bad. It was bad. It wasn't all bad. That's the thing, is she's a wonderful mother. She was a caring, giving, nurturing, thoughtful mother most of the time. But then there was the horror shows. And most of the time, I think she understood what my limits were. And so even though it was kind of terrifying, there was this kind of unspoken duel between us, or where I was almost like holding a line for her. And then it got so out of control for her that there needed to be intervention, because it was very dangerous.
How did you keep from internalizing that? And we talked about this in the conversation with the high school students earlier this evening. How did you keep from internalizing that some of this fell to you as the child? As kids, we want to please our parents, and no one lives in a perfect household. I think that can be established. You might think you live in a perfect household, but the reality is, despite what you might show on Facebook, we know sometimes there's something going on. How do you keep yourself? Because as a child, sometimes we feel then that we must be to blame if something's going wrong with mom or dad or the other adult. How did you keep yourself from falling into that trap? Because you feel like you haven't.
There's a lot of really, really powerful stuff you just talked about. I mean, you know, some people don't like labels. They don't want to be told they have a disease or a malady or an affliction. And particularly when you're given a mental health diagnosis, is that like a death sentence, or is like that's going to define you for the rest of your life? Like, that's not the game I want to play. And who are you? I live in a free country, and my business is my business. Like, I think it's important to appreciate that people have a right to feel that way. They don't have a right to victimize people. So there's an interesting tension in that area, and sometimes it takes community to help surface things that require support. But for me, my mother empowered me. She empowered me with love. So it was almost like she was a werewolf. Like, she would say, like, you are extraordinary, Sean. You are a beautiful human being. She would just pump me up as a person. You can do anything you want to do. She just made me believe that I was special and important. And then she would go into the violence and the self-torture that she would go into. And the blessing for me, my brother was different. My brother ended up with a alcohol and drug addiction problem for many years. He conquered it, and he's just lived, I don't know, 15, 20 years of like a great life now. But he dealt with our parents' divorce much differently than I did. For some reason, and I think what I described with my mom's mentality with me, and also my dad who adopted me, Sean Astin, Gomez from the original Addams Family, my mom was an emotional fireball, and my dad was this intellectual. So it was kind of a yin-yang parenting strategy that fell on me. And for some reason, I just never felt like it was my fault. I could always see that whatever the chaos and the trauma that was happening, it was clear that she was suffering. So yeah, she made the rest of us suffer, but I also never felt like she owed me an apology. I always felt like we're in it together. Like, you're in pain, you're suffering. I don't have like a solution other than I'm present, and like, I don't like seeing you like that. And once she would work her way, once it would play out, whatever the cycle was would play out, then she would be, guilt-ridden and, morose, and like, it was exhausting. It was dangerous. It was not fun in those moments. But in a weird way, I don't know. I mean, obviously I would rather maybe not have lived like that, but that existence like made me who I am. So, and a lot of our childhood was filled with excessive spending. My mom would like buy us toys and, computer and a guitar and a drum set. And, it's one of the, symptoms of bipolar is like, profligate spending. So we didn't realize that maybe this like heaping of, stuff was like, kind of a bad thing. But, and we ended up growing I developed a detachment from physical belongings, because she would look like in her worst moments, like, what's important to you? And then I'm going to destroy that, whether it's your self-esteem, whether it's some physical thing that's important to you. And so I ended up developing, you say it didn't internalize it. I absolutely internalized it. You cannot live, we all internalize everything we experience. And when you experience something that extreme, it's a part of you. And it didn't really begin to like feel, even if I wasn't conscious about it, but like appropriate for me to start to unpack what I felt. There was a long period of time where patience and internalizing whatever her thing was, like, there was no dealing with it. And that is a really hard thing to, like, for years to have to, own that. That was hard. And it wasn't until I got married where I started sensing the regret and the upset at her. And, my mom and I had a tension with and against each other our whole lives that was like chemical, but we also loved each other, and we cared, we hug and we'd share, we're so proud of each other. And, just, I think when people talk about mental illness and mental health strategies and something else, like, you ask 1,000 different people, you get 1,000 different stories and experiences and everything else. So it's interesting to take one person's kind of like anecdotes and their observations of something and be like, yeah, how can I apply that to my life? But I think people need to realize that their journey of discovery is theirs, and it's not easy, and it's not always fun, but there are real breakthroughs that can happen, real achievements. You can find patterns of life that are rewarding, and you can train yourself. My mom did an amazing job over the years realizing, she's like, oh, there's a metallic taste in my mouth, that her medicine was off. She could at a certain point she could identify that, because if you say to her like, Mom, have you taken your medicine, you might as well like slap her like that. You don't like, she doesn't want to be judged by you, but she started to develop the ability to judge herself and be like, actually, I think I need help right now. And so even though there were elements of her her mental health challenge that were with her whole life, she found a way.
What did that teach you about asking for help? And did you ever ask for help? Do you ever worry that history could repeat itself? And are you watching yourself for that?
Yeah, history does repeat itself. One of the questions from one of the students today was just blow away. Like, this particular, diagnosis has come down through my family. What if I have it? How am I going to live? I got married at 19 years old. I'm married 35 years. We have 3 daughters. I have 4 sets of eyeballs on me every second. I live life at a rate and like at a cadence that is like unnatural. How anybody could, I fly. Just my life is unbelievable. It's really a blessing. I'm so grateful that like God uses me to in so many fun and exciting and cool ways, but it's absurd the way I live my life. President of my union, I was running marathons, so like they're always looking at me like, this doesn't feel like a healthy moment for you. This feels like you're out of control. And my wife and I developed a vocabulary for that very early in our relationship. And I'm, such a flawed human being, and so capable of error that I enjoy being able to rely on her, and I have no problem being self-critical, self-analytical, something like that. So my life has been a study in that.
I think we all need that in our lives, though. Someone to be, and that probably is good advice for everyone out there if you notice that in friends or family, to speak up, and how do you have those conversations with people, or what would be some suggestions for having those conversations with people? In my life, it's my husband. If he sees I'm stressed, one of the tells is I can't get my words out, and he will just look at me and say, Melissa, use your words.
Wow.
Because I can't get the phrase out because there's, you have the overload. We all have kind of this maximum amount of
with
stuff
bipolar,
that can be here.
it's pressured speech. You're like talking so fast and you end up like your brain can't keep up with your mouth. That was one thing when my mom would talk like that, you'd be like, oh, okay. And if I talk like that, all of a sudden everybody, it's like meerkats in the house. What's going on over there? But I would say the first thing is that depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, anxiety, like the whole suite of potential things that we all kind of come into contact with our family, friends, neighbors, colleagues, whatever. Whatever people think it is, it's really important not to assume that what somebody else may have experienced is what you're going to experience. Everybody's an individual. So I think that's like a little mental get out of jail free card. Like just because, people know when they're having an experience, whether they suppress it, whether they have a support group or they have antagonistic kind of pressures that are on them or whatever, people can generally sense it. And, maybe not immediately, but over time, I think people just need to give themselves a break and ask themselves like, could I use a little help? I don't think talk therapy has anywhere near the kind of judgment load it used to. even medicines that people take, and go to CVS and, I'm going to get grandpa's meds, I'm going to, you're some kids, like there's just a level of conversancy that our society has evolved to, that now it's like, what's next? What's the next iteration of how society deals with this? I think if we all cultivate a disposition of like appreciation for what other people are going through, that will end up like refracting back on us. Like, we can't control other people. You control what you think. And if everybody in the sound of our voice thinks, you know what, before I judge something, and I have to say this, people have to protect themselves. People have to protect themselves and make sure they're physically safe, they're emotionally, mentally, spiritually safe from themselves and from other pressures that might come at them. It's okay to protect yourself. In fact, the only way you can be useful to yourself or anybody else is if you learn how to protect yourself. And then once you do that, so you don't feel like, boy, my job is to allow myself to be victimized. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, like, that person's suffering. Protect myself, but have sympathy, have empathy. And if society gets into the habit of that, which is pretty close now, I think people, this company A, was incredible the way they were talking and thinking about each other. These students, like, I'm not worried about these students today at all. They're rock solid. I mean, I can tell that a lot of them are dealing with pressures that you would, that are hard, and they look like they, I hope they get the support they need. But even with that, like, perceptible heaviness that some of them had, they also are like, they're good. They're going to be okay,
Well, I'm interested a little bit on how your experiences maybe shaped and influenced your career. We're going to ask a few questions about that when we wrap up the Hear Me, See Me podcast in just a moment. We are back here on the Hear Me, See Me podcast with actor Sean Astin. Thank you so much. We have gone through your background, your history in living with your mother, Patty Duke, who is very public about her experiences. Thank you. I ask questions for a living. But I love hearing the answers.
But you really listen, yeah.
That's where the magic comes in. And listening is part of your message. How vital is listening when we talk about things like, okay, you had commented when we did the event earlier that everybody knew what was going on in your house.
Yeah.
Who was really listening to you? And when someone would really listen to you, how much difference did that make?
Well, you just made me think. There were times where my mom it was literally physically crying for help. She's like, my heart hurts, I'm in pain, my head hurts. She would say these things. And as kids, you don't know what to do. And that's terrifying. But there was something so honest about it. And so that it made you care about her. It made you, in those moments, in those scary moments, it wasn't just about me being scared. It was like, what can you do to help this person who's in pain, who's telling you they're in pain? And I think it felt good for her to say that. I feel like, listening is a skill. It's hard to listen. In acting, it's the the magic. You said magic. It's the magic. When you really listen, something is unlocked, and to your scene partner, you can kind of really develop emotional connectedness and find layers of emotion that you might not have even realized were there or were what was supposed to happen, but it just happens. The problem with listening is that it requires patience. And when there's trauma happening, being patient is sometimes not healthy. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. But the ability to make the moment about the other person and really try and understand what they're doing, to shed the kind of judgment or expectation or kind of demands. You know, if you're a kid, there are certain demands that you can make on your parents that are like, yeah, I need food. Like, your job is to feed me. You know, your job's not to hit me. You know, there's certain expectations that kids have. Well, parents have the right to have certain expectations of their kids. So, but when, you know, just in families where there isn't, you know, kind of formal mental health challenges, listening to each other is just hard on a day-to-day basis. We want to do what we want to do. We want to, you know, you've got your work, you've got, you know, maybe you want to read a book, maybe you want to go do something, and the kids are doing their thing. And like, when is it okay to be selfish? And I try and tell people that, like, it really is okay to care for yourself, to do things you want to do. And if you're able to carve out space to do things you like and that fuel you and make you healthy and strong, fitness, leisure, whatever it is, then in the moments where what's required of you is where the opportunity for you to contribute is by listening, you can do it with generosity. You know, some people listen for the angle that they can attack, and they're not really listening with an empathetic spirit. So, you know, if this was easy, there wouldn't be an entire industry of people talking about the kinds of things we're talking about. So, but yeah, it's like puppies. It's just magic.
Puppy breath, right?
Yeah, it's just
instant
like,
calm and relaxation. Yeah. We always say that when we have animals visit the newsroom. It's calming, it's relaxing. You've mentioned trauma a bit, and there has been a lot of research in recent years into trauma-informed care and what trauma means and how trauma influences people moving forward, even if they don't realize that it has. Do you feel like trauma influenced your career or maybe some of your career choices at all? And trauma impacts different people differently. You mentioned your brother and how he maybe struggled a bit more in how trauma impacted him. Yeah. But for you, you seem to have gone on to a very healthy life, healthy career. But is trauma kind of there in any of the choices you made?
I don't know how many years ago it was where where I was, a light bulb went off, or I was made to understand, or I learned that most of the time when there's dysfunction or there's you know, pain, kind of continuing pain and this kind of thing, that it can be charted back. Even when there's like a chemical situation going on, a brain chemistry situation, it's usually coupled with something traumatic, you know, whether it was a certain abuse or who knows what it was. It can be so many different things. For me, my mother, you know, she brought me into this world under a cloud of her own chaos and drama. And she looked to me as a baby to help create stability for her. I was like this thing that saved her life, as she described it. And so growing up, I think on some level, I felt like the right thing to do was to be what she wanted me to be. And there was a kind of like sense of urgency about always doing things, always trying to achieve, always trying to, you know, whatever. And so I think my trauma response was kind of guided by, or influenced by that dynamic.
Ultimately, have you realized though that what you chose to do, you did for yourself? You're not an actor because your mom told you to become an actor. You now are an actor because you enjoy it, you find it fulfilling. You know,
free will and predestination are kissing cousins. And
a very fine line.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like throughout my life I've made so many conscious decisions, and I've been committed to doing what I want to do. My education, you know, I got a master's degree. I've done triathlon. I've like all these things that I've done have been conscious choices. On the one hand, on the other hand, I always have this sense when things are happening of like some inevitability to it. Like this was inevitable. I don't know if you call it fate or faith or whatever, but I don't. And you talk about trauma response, trauma-informed therapy and stuff like that. There are people who are trained to help people navigate the relationship to their trauma. I'm sure it's different for everybody. I'm not a trained person for that, but some people self-medicate, they self-discover, they go on long walks, they become yogis, I don't know, whatever. Like people find a way. I think that I'm wearing a tie, I'm sitting here using a sophisticated vocabulary, having experienced this thing, but I am like a very flawed person, and so I don't think I can. I find it liberating to know that, like, I'm a work in progress. So I don't need to have finality about my kind of conquering of what trauma did to me. I was empowered at a young age to be able to navigate it in my way. And thank God I have my wife and kids. And, I like what I do, and I feel a sense of mission. I live my life with a sense of purpose and mission every day. And so, if that's unresolved trauma, then bully.
Do you find it reflected a little bit in some of the roles that you choose? So Goonies ultimately is about friendship and loyalty. You think about Rudy, an underdog, recognizing potential and people realizing the potential in a person for who he was. You think about Lord of the Rings and the loyalty and a journey and relying on each other as you try to fulfill this mission. I don't know about Stranger Things. I'm not really familiar with that character.
Bob Newby came into the story to be, Joyce was the mother whose son was like abducted and went into this other world. Then Bob comes in and he just loves her and nurtures her and he helps the kids and he's just this, like, source
Loyalty,
of goodness,
helping people, supporting people, lifting people up.
I think the aspects of my personality that are like I believe in decency, I believe in goodness, I believe in doing the right thing and all those things. I'm do other things that are not right too, but I think I live at this. Those are surface qualities for me, and I think filmmakers kind of are like, oh, I can use that. I think that determination and fight, and leadership. Mikey's a leader. He wants to save their home. Go find the treasure, save the home. Rudy is a leader in terms of his own identity. He's not going to let other people put on him who he is. He wants to do what he wants to do. So that's kind of leadership. Samwise lives in support of Frodo. That's a kind of leadership. The ability to, sublimate whatever your own fears are, to be able to, risk, death to support somebody. That's leadership. So I think I have a lot of those innate qualities. For some reason, I feel when something happens, like I have the ability to try and help and do something, and I'm the president of my union, and I feel very powerful responsibility to advocate for our members and stuff. But there's no question that the way I live my life and the way my family was a crucible that made me who I am, and who I am is involved in all the characters I do, whether they're those good quality characters or characters that I do that are not like that. So
not so nice.
Not so nice. Yeah, I play bad guys. A lot of times they hire me to play the bad guy. They're like, because nobody would expect it.
No one would expect it. And ultimately, what I feel from your story here, Sean, is that it's not about where you came from. It's about how you use that experience to develop an empathy and an understanding that moves yourself and your purpose forward to become what you want to be. That.
Sounds pretty good.
Well, what do you want people to learn from your story and your experience? And it's going to be different for everyone, I'm sure, when they hear what you speak about. Everyone's going to take something different away.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the lesson, that we're all individuals.
Well, I think sometimes when people see or hear their experience reflected back to them, that gives them a sense of peace and gives them a sense of inspiration and hope. If it's being talked about in a way that feels like there's as much as I was like, I don't want to resolve, or I don't know how to, trauma resolution, whatever. But life is good. Life is good. Things, there are great outcomes, even for people who live with suffering. So I think when people see and hear that, if they see that in my descriptions of my mother, who I love, I revere my mother. She died 11 years ago now. She was a glorious human being, and I don't judge her for her experience. I hold her accountable, but not in a way that isn't, I feel like it's pretty well adjusted. But I would just like to encourage people to know that, like, they're okay. That one thing with that girl today, you know, she was like, you know, what's going to happen to me, basically, was what she was asking. And I'm like, you're okay. It's not going to be easy. Life is hard. You may be diagnosed with this, you may not be. But now in this society, in this day and age, you do not have to look too far. You got to choose to look a little bit or choose to accept, but there's help everywhere. There's community everywhere. There's support everywhere. There's like, it's all around you. It's sometimes dangerous to get it because of whatever the dynamic you're in is. So, you know, you have to be careful. And so it's not easy, but life is okay. It's a gift. It's a gift to be alive. And, you know, one kid was like, what should I do? You know, what should I do if I have time off? You know, they feel like I need to be doing something. I was like, well, what gives you joy? What do you want? Learn an instrument. I don't know. You know, read a magazine. I don't know. Whatever. It's up for you to. My dad would always say, Sean, what do you really want? And I'm like, I don't know, but I know that I'm doing what I. It's an amazing thing to feel like you are where you're supposed to be, and that is one of the greatest blessings I've ever had in my life. Is that I most of the time feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be, and I don't know if that is a skill, or if, like, I don't know why my faith developed in the confident way that it has, but I feel like it's unshakable. So I hope for people to just give themselves a break, whether it's themselves that are navigating this, or whether it's their family or their friends or whatever. Like, we can't fix everything, but things get fixed. So having a little bit of confidence in that is almost the trick. It's almost a trick to be like, I sense things are going to be okay. You can manifest that. You can will that into being. You know, not in a hocus pocus, you know, mumbo jumbo kind of way, but it's true. It's true that if you set your intention to, like, have things be okay, the odds of it being okay are greatly increased. So all things being equal, have a little faith.
Well, I am grateful and feel blessed that life put you in this time and this space to be able to share your perspective with us. Thank you so much, Sean. Appreciate
I wish you continued good works with everything you do with this podcast and with your broadcast career and your family.
Appreciate that. Same to you. And no matter where you are in life or where life is taking you, we hear you, we see you.